She woke up in a Rockstar's penthouse wearing nothing but his vintage concert shirt. On her finger, his grandmother's diamond ring. In her pocket, a voice recorder. She was there to destroy his career. She had no idea he was about to change her life forever. Before we begin, we are so close to reaching 500 subscribers, and we need your help to get there. If you enjoy our stories, please consider subscribing and let us know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means everything to us. Now, let us tell you how she ended up engaged to the most dangerous man in rock and roll. The morning light cut through the blinds of the penthouse suite like a blade, slicing across Jax Reiner's face with merciless precision. He groaned, pressing his palm against his forehead, the remnants of last night's whiskey still pounding behind his eyes. The silk sheets beneath him felt foreign, too clean, too expensive. Nothing like the cramped tour bus bunk he'd grown accustomed to over the past 8 months. He reached blindly for the nightstand, knocking over an empty bottle of bourbon and what sounded like several rings. His rings. The skull. The serpent. The one shaped like a guitar pick that a fan had thrown on stage in Detroit. Then his hand touched something warm. Jax's eyes snapped open. There was a woman in his bed. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she was already awake, sitting cross-legged at the foot of the mattress, wearing nothing but his vintage Guns N' Roses shirt. The one he'd worn during the encore in Madison Square Garden. The one that was supposed to be framed. She was beautiful. Not in the manufactured way of the models who usually orbited backstage. All sharp angles and practiced pouts. This woman had curves that the shirt couldn't hide. Dark hair tumbling in chaotic waves past her shoulders. And eyes the color of aged whiskey that watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Good morning, Rockstar," she said, her voice carrying a slight rasp that did something uncomfortable to his chest. "Sleep well?" Jax pushed himself up onto his elbows, the sheet falling to reveal the tattooed landscape of his torso. He caught her eyes flicker down, just for a moment, before returning to his face with what looked suspiciously like amusement. "Who are you?" The words came out harsher than he intended, but his head was splitting, and he couldn't remember a single thing after the third encore. "Wow." She pressed a hand to her chest in mock offense. "And here I thought last night meant something." His stomach dropped. "What happened last night?" The woman tilted her head, studying him like he was a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. "You really don't remember?" "I remember the show. I remember the after-party. I remember telling my manager to go to hell." He paused, rubbing his jaw. "I think I might have thrown a television off the balcony." "You did. It was very Rockstar of you." She unfolded her legs and stood, the shirt riding up just enough to make his mouth go dry. "You also proposed to me." The words hit him like a bucket of ice water. "I did what?" She held up her left hand. On her ring finger sat a massive diamond that Jax recognized with growing horror. It was his grandmother's ring, the one his mother had given him before his first tour, the one he kept locked in the safe because it was the only thing in his life that actually mattered. "I said yes, by the way." Her smile was sweet as arsenic. "In case you were wondering." Jax was out of bed before he knew he was moving, standing in nothing but his boxers, his 6'4" frame towering over her. Up close, he could see the faint spray of freckles across her nose, the tiny scar above her eyebrow, the way her pupils dilated slightly as she looked up at him. "That ring was in a safe," he said slowly. "A safe with a code that only I know." "You told me the code. Right before you told me I had eyes like whiskey and a mouth made for sin." She bit her lower lip, and despite everything, Jax felt heat coil in his belly. "You were very poetic. Must be all those song lyrics." "This isn't funny. I'm not laughing." He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. just looked up at him with those amber eyes that seemed to see right through the leather and danger persona he'd spent 10 years perfecting. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice dropping to the low growl that made audiences scream and record executives nervous. "And what do you actually want?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then something shifted in her expression, the playfulness bleeding away to reveal something harder underneath. "My name is Camila Santos. I'm a music journalist, and what I want is an interview." Jax released her wrist like it had burned him. "A journalist?" "From Rolling Stone, actually. I've been trying to get access to you for 8 months. Your people kept shutting me down." She shrugged, the gesture pulling the shirt off one shoulder to reveal smooth olive skin. "So I got creative." "You call this creative? You call drugging me and staging some kind of fake engagement creative." Camila's eyes flashed. "I didn't drug you. You got drunk all by yourself, just like you do every night after every show. I just happened to be there when you decided to spill your guts about how lonely it is at the top and how you'd give it all up for someone who saw the real you." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the lingering notes of his own cologne on her skin. "And for the record, you put that ring on my finger yourself. Dropped to one knee right there on the balcony, right before you threw the TV." Jax felt something cold settling in his chest. Not anger anymore. Something worse. Shame. Because fragments were starting to come back now. The empty suite. The silence after the screaming crowds. The way he'd ordered bottle after bottle because the quiet felt like drowning. And a woman with whiskey eyes who'd sat beside him on the couch and actually listened. "What did I tell you?" he asked quietly. "Enough." Camila's voice had softened too, losing its sharp edge. Enough to know that the whole dangerous bad boy thing is an act. Enough to know that you haven't written a song that actually meant something in 3 years because your label keeps you too busy playing a character. Enough to know that your father used to hit you, and that's why you flinch whenever someone moves too fast. The air between them had changed, charged with something that felt dangerous in an entirely different way. "That's not for public consumption," Jax said, and his voice sounded strange even to his own ears. "I know." She reached up, and her fingertips brushed his chest, right over the tattoo that covered a scar he'd never explained to anyone. "That's why I'm not going to print it." "Then what's the point? What do you actually want?" Camila held his gaze for a long moment. "I want the real story. Not the tabloid garbage about trashed hotel rooms and supermodel girlfriends. The real one. About a kid from nowhere who made himself into a god of rock and roll, and what it cost him." She paused. "I want to write something that matters. Something true." "And you thought the best way to get that was to play dress up in my shirt and pretend we're engaged. I thought the best way to get that was to show you that I'm not afraid of you. That I see through the act. That maybe, just maybe, I'm the first person in a very long time who actually wants to know who Jax Reiner is when he's not performing." The silence stretched between them, taut as a guitar string about to snap. Then Jax laughed. It was a real laugh, not the practiced chuckle he used in interviews. It rumbled up from somewhere deep in his chest and cracked open something he'd kept locked down tight for years. "You're insane," he said. "Probably." Camila smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Is that a yes?" "That's a, I need coffee before I make any decisions that could destroy my career." He turned away, running a hand through his disheveled dark hair. "There's a robe in the bathroom. Put it on before my manager shows up and has an aneurysm." "What about the ring?" Jax paused at the bedroom door. He should demand it back. He should call security. He should do any number of sensible things that his publicist would approve of. Instead, he heard himself say, "Keep it. Consider it collateral." Collateral for what? He looked back over his shoulder, and something shifted in his expression. Something that made Camila's breath catch. "For the story you're going to tell. Just make sure it's the truth." He disappeared into the bathroom, and Camila stood alone in the morning light, the weight of his grandmother's ring suddenly feeling like more than she'd bargained for. She hadn't planned for any of this. Not really. She'd planned to get close, get the story, get out. Clean and simple, career-defining. What she hadn't planned for was the way he'd looked at her last night, after the 5th glass of bourbon, when the walls had finally come down. The way his voice had broken when he talked about his mother. The way he'd touched her face like she was something precious and whispered that she was the first real thing he'd seen in years. That had felt less like a story, and more like something dangerous, something true. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her jeans, which were somewhere on the floor near the balcony. She fished it out and saw a text from her editor. "Well, did you get access?" Camila looked at the bathroom door, behind which she could hear the shower running. She looked at the ring on her finger, worth more than her apartment in Brooklyn. She thought about the man behind the myth, and how much it would cost them both if she told the whole truth. Then she typed back, "I'm in. This is going to be bigger than we thought." She just wasn't sure anymore if she meant the story or something else entirely. 3 weeks. That's how long Camila had been embedded in the chaos that was Jax Reiner's life. 3 weeks of tour buses and private jets. 3 weeks of screaming crowds and quiet moments backstage. 3 weeks of watching him transform from the exhausted, haunted man she'd met that morning into the leather-clad god who made 50,000 people lose their minds every night. And 3 weeks of pretending that the fake engagement was still just a cover story. "You're staring again." Camila blinked, realizing that Jax had caught her watching him from across the green room. He was shirtless, as usual before a show, and his personal trainer was taping up his wrist where he'd strained it during the Chicago concert. The muscles of his back shifted beneath tattooed skin as he rotated his shoulder, testing the mobility. "I'm observing," she corrected, holding up her recorder. "It's called journalism." "Uh-huh." He dismissed the trainer with a nod and turned to face her fully, arms crossed over his chest in a way that made the tribal bands around his biceps stretch taut. "And what exactly have you observed?" "That you're nervous." His eyebrow arched. "I don't get nervous." "You're doing that thing with your jaw. The grinding thing. You do it every time we're in Texas." She tilted her head. "Why is that?" For a moment, something flickered across his face, too fast to catch. Then the mask slammed back down, and he was the untouchable rock star again. "Maybe I just don't like cowboys." "Jax?" He held her gaze for a long moment, then sighed, the tension bleeding out of his massive shoulders. 3 weeks, and she'd learned to read him better than people who'd known him for years. It was unsettling. It was also, in some twisted way, a relief. "My father lives in Austin," he said finally. "Hasn't spoken to me in 12 years, but he lives about 20 minutes from this venue. Every time we play Texas, I wonder if he's going to show up. Would you want him to?" The laugh that escaped him was bitter. "I don't know. That's the worst part. I've spent my whole career becoming everything he said I couldn't be, and some pathetic part of me still wants him to see it." He uncrossed his arms and moved toward the couch where she sat, dropping down beside her with the casual grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Pretty sad for a guy who sold out Madison Square Garden, huh?" "Pretty human," Camila said quietly. "There's a difference." Jax turned his head, and suddenly his face was very close to hers. Close enough that she could see the different shades of blue in his eyes, from ice at the edges to something warmer near the pupils. Close enough that she could smell the sandalwood of his aftershave and the faint hint of whiskey on his breath. "You're different," he said. "You know that?" "Different how?" "Different like everyone else in my life wants something from me. The label wants hits. The fans want a fantasy. My manager wants me to keep being the cash cow that pays for his house in the Hamptons." His hand came up, and his thumb traced the line of her jaw so softly it felt like a question. "But you. I can't figure out what you want." Camila's heart was hammering against her ribs. This was dangerous. This was everything she'd been trained to avoid. Never get too close to the story. Never blur the lines. Never, ever fall for the subject. But his hand was warm against her skin, and his eyes held something she recognized because she felt it too. Loneliness. "The story," she said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. "I want the story." "Is that all?" The door burst open before she could answer. 20 minutes to showtime, boss." Derek, Jax's tour manager, didn't even glance at Camila. She'd become part of the furniture over the past 3 weeks, accepted by the crew as Jax's journalist, with varying degrees of suspicion. "We've got a situation." Jax was on his feet instantly, the intimate moment evaporating like smoke. "What kind of situation?" "Your father's at the gate. Says he wants to talk." The color drained from Jax's face so fast, Camila thought he might pass out. She'd seen him face crowds of 100,000 people without flinching, but 5 words about his father turned him into the scared kid he'd been trying to outrun his whole life. "Tell him to leave," Jax said, but his voice had gone flat, mechanical. "He says he won't go until he sees you. Security's getting antsy. There are cameras everywhere, and TMZ's already got a guy out there who recognized him." Jax's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The veins in his forearms stood out like cords, and for a moment, Camila thought he might put one of those fists through the wall. Then she did something stupid. She stood up and took his hand. His whole body went rigid at her touch, every muscle tensed for a fight that wasn't coming. But she didn't let go. She just held on, her fingers threading through his, and waited. Slowly, so slowly, the tension began to drain out of him. "I'll go with you," she said, "if you want." "This isn't part of the story." "I know." He looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. Something shifted in his expression, that wall he kept up cracking just enough to let her see the fear underneath. "Why?" he asked. "Because no one should have to face their demons alone." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, Jax squeezed her hand once, hard, and turned to Derek. "Bring him to the secondary green room. No cameras, no phones, no one else in the room." He paused. Except her. Derek's eyebrows shot up, but he knew better than to argue. "You've got 15 minutes before we need you on stage. Then I'll make it quick." The walk to the secondary green room felt endless. Camila kept her hand in Jax's, feeling the slight tremor in his grip that he was trying so hard to hide. This man who commanded stages like a general commanded armies was terrified of a conversation. The door opened, and there he was. Ray Reiner was smaller than Camila had expected, shorter than his son by several inches, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent too many years working construction in the Texas sun. But his eyes were the same pale blue as Jax's, and his hands, even clasped nervously in front of him, looked like they could still do damage. "Jackson." His voice was rough, uncertain. "You look good. Bigger than the last time." "What do you want?" Jax's voice could have frozen stone. "I wanted to say." Ray stopped, started again. "I've been following your career, seen all the interviews, bought all the albums. Your mother would have been proud. Don't." The word came out like a whip crack. "Don't you dare talk about her. She loved you, son, more than anything. And I was too messed up to see it, too angry at the world to appreciate what I had." Ray took a step forward, and Jax took a step back, pulling Camila with him. "I've been sober for 5 years now, working the steps, and step 9 is making amends. You think showing up at my concert with some 12-step apology is going to fix what you did?" Jax's laugh was the ugliest sound Camila had ever heard. "You broke her heart. You broke mine. You made me believe I was worthless, that I'd never be anything. And now that I've proved you wrong, you want absolution?" "I I know I don't deserve it. You're right. You don't. The two men stared at each other across the small room, a lifetime of pain and anger crackling in the air between them. Then Ray's gaze slid to Camila, to her hand still intertwined with Jax's. Is this your girlfriend? Fiancé, Jax said, and the word hit Camila like a physical blow. Her name is Camila, and she's the first person who's ever made me feel like maybe I'm not as broken as you made me think I was. Ray nodded slowly, something like regret crossing his weathered features. I'm glad you found someone. I really am. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. This is from your mother. She wrote it before she passed, asked me to give it to you when you were ready. I've been carrying it around for 8 years, waiting for the right moment. He set the envelope on the table and stepped back toward the door. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Jackson. I know I don't have that right. I just wanted you to have this, and to know that I see you, the real you, and I'm sorry I couldn't see it before. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. Jax stood frozen, staring at the envelope like it might explode. Then his knees buckled, and he would have fallen if Camila hadn't been there, pulling him down onto the couch, holding him against her, while his whole body shook with the effort of not falling apart. You don't have to read it now, she whispered against his hair. You don't have to read it ever. This is your choice, your timeline. Why are you doing this? His voice was muffled against her shoulder. This isn't the story. This is just my mess. Camila closed her eyes, and the truth came out before she could stop it. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, you stopped being a story and started being the man I can't stop thinking about. And I know that's unprofessional and probably stupid, but watching you pretend to be okay when you're dying inside hurts me in ways I don't know how to explain. Jax pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his jaw was tight with the effort of holding back tears he'd probably never let anyone see. The engagement, he said slowly. It's not fake anymore, is it? Camila thought about all the reasons she should lie. The professional boundaries. The ethical complications. The fact that her editor was expecting an exposé, not a love story. But she'd spent weeks learning that Jax Reiner could spot a lie from a mile away, and she was so tired of pretending. No, she said. I don't think it is. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of everything neither of them could say. And when Derek knocked on the door 3 minutes later to tell them it was showtime, Jack stood up, wiped his eyes, and slipped his mother's letter into his jacket pocket. Stay side stage, he told her. I want to see you when I look out there. I need to know something real exists in all of this. Then he walked out to face 50,000 screaming fans. And Camila Santos finally understood the difference between writing a story and living one. The final show of the tour was in Los Angeles, at the Hollywood Bowl, and everything was falling apart. Camila sat in the corner of the dressing room, watching Jax read the Rolling Stone article that had dropped 3 hours ago. Not her article. The other one. The one written by Marcus Webb, a senior editor who'd gotten tired of waiting for Camila to deliver the exposé they'd been expecting. Jax Reiner, the man behind the myth, the headline screamed. But it wasn't the profile Camila had been writing. It was a hit piece, cobbled together from unnamed sources and old rumors, painting Jax as a drug-addicted narcissist who used women and threw away friendships like empty bottles. Did you know about this? Jax's voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came before hurricanes. I found out an hour before you did. I've been trying to call my editor, but he won't answer. Camila's hands were shaking. Jax, I swear to you, I didn't write this. I didn't give them any of this. But you work for them. I quit 20 minutes ago. Left a voicemail for Marcus telling him exactly what I thought of his journalistic integrity. Jax set the magazine down slowly, his jaw working. The muscles in his forearms were taut, and Camila could see the effort it was taking him not to explode. The thing about my father, the stuff about the drinking, the part about my mother's death. He looked at her, and his eyes were chips of blue ice. That came from somewhere. Not from me. Camila stood, crossing the room to stand in front of him. Look at me. Look at my face. I know you can tell when someone's lying. So look at me and tell me what you see. For a long moment, he searched her face. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. Just let him see everything she'd been trying to hide for weeks. The fear. The guilt for getting him into this mess. And underneath it all, something she was only now admitting to herself. Love. Stupid. Inconvenient. Terrifying love. One of the roadies, Jax said finally. Tommy. He was there the night I told you about my mom. I didn't see him, but he could have been listening. He got fired 2 weeks ago for selling autographed merchandise on eBay. He laughed bitterly. Guess he found a more lucrative side hustle. The relief that flooded through Camila was so intense she nearly sat down. You believe me? I believe you're the only person in the last decade who's seen me at my worst and didn't run. He reached out and pulled her toward him, his hands settling on her hips. I believe you stayed when any sane person would have walked. And I believe that whatever this is between us, it's not fake anymore. It hasn't been fake for a long time. Then prove it. His grip tightened, and his eyes darkened with something that made her breath catch. Stay. Not for the story, not for Rolling Stone. Stay because you want to, because this matters to you. My career is over. Marcus will make sure of that. So start a new one. Write a book. Start a blog. Hell, start a rock band for all I care. He pulled her closer, until their bodies were pressed together, and she could feel the heat of him through their clothes. But don't leave. I've spent my whole life performing for people who only wanted the character. I can't go back to that. Not after knowing what it feels like to be seen. Camilla's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her palms. She thought about her apartment in Brooklyn, her half-finished article, the career she'd spent a decade building. Then she thought about the man in front of her. The one who'd read his mother's letter with tears streaming down his face, and then written his first honest song in 3 years. The one who'd called his father to say he wasn't ready to forgive, but he was willing to try. The one who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, I'll stay. But I have conditions. The corner of his mouth quirked up. Of course you do. First, I'm still writing the real story, my way, on my terms. And you don't get to read it until it's done. Agreed. Second, we're not going public with this until you're ready. I don't want people thinking I slept my way into a scoop. Technically, the scoop came before the sleeping. Jax. Fine. Agreed. Third. She paused, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. You have to promise me that you'll keep being real. No more hiding behind the character. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly. His hand came up to cup her face, tilting it toward him. I promise. Then kiss me, Rockstar. He did. It wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss from the green room in Texas. This one was slow and thorough, the kind of kiss that made promises. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back as he explored her mouth with a focus that made her knees weak. She could feel the hard planes of his chest against her, the corded muscles of his arms as he held her like she was precious, like she was real, like she was finally exactly where she was supposed to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the door opened. Derek stood in the doorway, phone in hand. Boss, we've got a situation. Another one? Jax didn't let go of Camila, just turned his head to look at his tour manager with something like exasperation. What now? The crowd's seen the article. They're chanting for a response. The label wants you to do damage control, read a statement, play nice. What's the alternative? Tell the truth, address it from the stage, give them the real Jax instead of the press release version. Camila felt Jax's whole body tense. This was it. The moment of truth. Everything he'd been learning about vulnerability, about authenticity, about letting people see the man instead of the myth. He looked down at her. What do you think? I think you've been hiding for 10 years, and it hasn't made you happy. She straightened his collar, smoothing the leather of his jacket. I think you wrote a song about your mother last week that made your entire band cry. I think you're stronger than you know, and braver than you give yourself credit for. And I think that crowd out there doesn't want a statement. They want you. Jax was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was the real smile, the one that transformed his face from dangerously handsome to something softer, more human. Stay side stage, he said, echoing his words from Texas. I want to see you when I look out there. Always. He kissed her once more, quick and fierce, then strode out the door toward the stage. Camila followed Derek through the maze of backstage corridors until she found her spot in the wings, just close enough to see without being seen. The roar of the crowd was deafening, 80,000 people packed into the bowl, all of them waiting. Then Jax walked on stage, and the roar became a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. But instead of launching into the set, he walked to the microphone and waited. Slowly the crowd quieted, confused, expectant. So, Jax said, his voice carrying across the amphitheater. I hear there's a story going around about what kind of man I am. The silence was absolute. Here's the truth. I've made mistakes. A lot of them. I've drunk too much, trusted the wrong people, and spent a decade being so afraid of being vulnerable that I forgot how to be real. He paused, and Camila could see him searching the wings until his eyes found her. But someone reminded me recently that the only stories worth telling are the true ones, so here's mine. And then he told them. Not everything. Not the private moments that belonged only to him and Camila, but enough. His mother's death, his father's abuse, the loneliness that had followed him through sold-out stadiums and empty hotel rooms, the woman who'd broken through his walls by refusing to be impressed by his armor. This next song is new, he said finally. I wrote it about what it feels like to finally be seen. It's not polished. It's not what the label wanted. But it's real. And from now on, real is all I've got. He sat down at the piano, something he never did during shows, and began to play. The song was simple. Just him and the keys, no backup, no pyrotechnics, no walls of guitars. Just a man singing about a woman who'd looked past the rock god and found the scared kid underneath. About learning to let go of armor that had become a prison. About love that felt like coming home. By the second chorus, half the crowd was crying. Camila certainly was. When the last note faded, the silence stretched for one heartbeat. 2, 3. Then the applause started. Not the frenzied screaming of fans wanting an encore, but something deeper, sustained, respectful. Jax stood, walked to the microphone one more time. One more thing, he said. That journalist the article mentioned. The one who supposedly seduced me for a story. He smiled, and 80,000 people held their breath. I'm going to marry her. For real this time. The crowd erupted. And in the wings, Camila laughed through her tears, touching the ring she'd never taken off, thinking about how wrong she'd been about everything. She'd come looking for a story. She'd found something so much better. 6 months later, they were married on a beach in Malibu. She wore white. He wore leather. The ring was the same one she'd worn since that first morning, and this time, when he slipped it on her finger, They both remembered everything. Rolling Stone ran the story of their wedding on the cover. Camila wrote the article herself. Now I want to know what you think about this story. Camila went undercover, got close to Jax, and ended up falling in love with the real man behind the Rockstar image. Some people would call that unprofessional. Others would call it fate. What about you? Do you think she was right to stay when her career fell apart? Would you have trusted someone who started your relationship with a lie, even if that lie turned into something real? And let me ask you this. If you were Jax, standing on that stage with 80,000 people waiting, would you have had the courage to strip away the armor and show the world who you really are? Maybe you have been in a situation where you had to choose between the safe path and the honest one. Maybe you know what it feels like to wear a mask so long you forget what's underneath. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story made you feel something, if you found yourself rooting for Jax and Camila, if you need to know what happens next in our stories, then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Join the family. Because the best stories are the ones we experience together. We will be back soon with another tale that will stay with you long after it ends. Do not miss it.